Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, I've literally just walked back in the door from having been to see the brand new Justice League movie. Before I start my review of that film, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of my subscribers. I've hit another milestone a couple of days ago. I've hit the 1,000 subscriber milestone. So hopefully this is just the first of many more milestones. I've been growing at a rate of approximately 50 subscribers a month since I started. Just over a year ago. So it's awesome to have you all on board, and hopefully the content that I'm delivering is enjoyable, informative, entertaining, and you're getting something out of it. I'd also just like to say, for those who haven't seen it yet, I have now set up my Patreon. So if you want to see more of this sort of content, I'd really like to be able to produce more of it, but obviously it's just a matter of getting funding behind it. If you like the content and you want to put some funding behind it, then please click on the Patreon link above, or there is another one that will appear at the end of this video. So let's get into it. Justice League, what did I think? Because I know a lot of you have been asking me. You've been saying, come on, you're the guy who did that Batman v Superman review, and you responded to the critics, and we want to know what you think about Justice League. Let me start with the things that I really enjoyed or I thought were good about this film. First of all, I loved, before the movie had even started, I loved the visual promotion material that was created for this film. We've had two good movies like that this year. One is Thor Ragnarok, and now the Justice League film. And it's clear that the visual artists who created the movie posters and all the imagery for the film have understood at long last that, hey, this is actually a comic book genre, and the core strength of comic books is what? That they are a visual storytelling medium. They're graphic art, right? And so it's great to see promotional materials that are actually graphic art in and of their own right, and are attractive to look at. So I thought that was great with this film. The trailer's not so good. Again, we've got that same problem of giving away a little bit too much, and I wish perhaps they'd kept some of the funnier lines or some of the sort of key moments back from these trailers, but it's just the modern trend, unfortunately. I thought the Batman suit in this film was quite cool by the end. It was pretty good at the beginning. There's a little bit, probably about 2/3 of the way through the film, where the Batman suit just, look, I don't know what happened, but it sort of started to look a little bit rubbery and costumey. One of the hallmarks of Batman for the last few Batman films, obviously Nolan and what we've seen now from Snyder and co, is that the Batman suit is looked pretty good. It still looked great. It hasn't ever been reduced to the awful depths of the Schumacher incident. That's how we'll refer to it. But it's in this film, there's a little period of probably 10 minutes or so throughout a key point in the film where it just looked a little bit rubbery and costumey, but I will say they redeemed themselves, and that sort of final technical Batman suit we get at the end was really, really cool. So I love that about this film. And also the Batman sequences are quite good in this film. They actually feel like they have been lifted from the pages of a Batman comic, which I thought was great. It seemed to me like what they were doing is, and I know this probably didn't help the film tonally, but what they were doing was each of the characters, they were sort of trying to create a specific tonal feel to the visuals, and Batman definitely has a unique sort of tonal feel, and you can see, I think, Snyder's influence around some of the visuals around Gotham, and that very gothic look that it has. The new characters, they're all great, but I think for me, Cyborg and the Flash were probably, they were actually one of the really cool aspects of this film. A little bit lacking in some character development, perhaps. We'll talk more about that in a second, but I actually thought they were cool, and I really enjoyed them. And in the trailers, I did wonder whether they were going to have enough to do, or whether they were going to be treated as sort of secondary characters. And I've heard someone complain already that they thought Cyborg was just treated as like a computer interface, but I didn't feel that way at all. I actually felt he was quite a pivotal character in this. He's given quite an important role to play, and he's effectively, he is presented almost as being on a par with Superman, which, so they give him a bit of gravitas as well. So it's, I really enjoyed Cyborg, and I really enjoyed The Flash. I would say that the one thing that this movie is really strong on is the whole aspect of this Justice League being a team. One thing that I feel about the Avengers is that the Avengers basically has a team that doesn't really feel like it needs to be a team. It just it feels like you could subtract members of that team and you could still defeat the bad guy, or you could still execute your plot. But in this movie, each member of the Justice League has their own unique role to play. They bring their own unique gifts and talents to the actual team. And it actually works really well. And I think that to me, they did team better than any of the Avengers movies or this Captain America Civil War, or any of those other movies have done teamwork. It actually looks like real teamwork. They need each other and they're working together. It's not like a group of people who are serving another character. This was one of the weaknesses, I think, of the Wonder Woman film, was that it did feel a little bit like the other characters were there just to set up these heroic defeats that were carried out by Wonder Woman. And you can't help that, because they're just humans and mere mortals, and she's the supernatural superhero. But in this film, it worked. It actually worked. And the other thing, like Superman is great in this film. That's another thing I really liked about this. And also, the one thing I worried about was that Superman was going to overshadow the other characters. But in actual fact, they did a really good job of presenting the fact that Superman has a whole round, sort of an all-round skills package, if you like, and strengths package that gives him a certain superiority, but it's not absolute, and that each of these other individual characters do have something that they can bring to the table, apart from perhaps Batman, who's sort of the odd one out, but they each have something they can bring to the table that does match it with Superman. And so I thought that was done really, really well, and that worked really well. But there are some problems that I had with the film, and before I give you my final summation of what I think about the movie, let me tell you some of the things that I didn't like about the film. And I've broken them down into two categories, possibly three, but the two main categories are story issues and technical issues. So let's look first at the story issues. As soon as I heard about this 2-hour time limit that was being imposed by Warner Brothers, I thought to myself, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. What are they doing? What studio exec sat round in a meeting and said, hey, I've got an idea. I know how we can make our movies better. Let's limit them to just 2 hours. And we'll say to our creative teams, you're not allowed to make any more than 2 hours worth of story. And that's it. Like, this is not a good idea. There's so many reasons, even on a basic sort of money-making level. Wouldn't you be wanting to encourage people to go to the cinema by saying, hey, you get more bang for your buck if you go to the cinema? It's not 90 minutes. You get a whole extra 60 minutes on top of your usual 90 minutes that you get on Netflix type movies and everything else. And so at that level, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But more importantly, at a creative level, it just hampers creativity. And unfortunately, this film does suffer as a result. It feels rushed in places, because what you've got is a film that's trying, and I think it does the best that it can with these limitations, but what it's trying to do is it's trying to introduce new characters. It is trying to introduce a brand new villain. It is trying to get all of those characters to give them a motivation to create a brand new team that doesn't exist. And on top of that, it's got to actually tell the story of this team fighting the bad guy. And so that's a big ask. There's a lot in there. And really, this film, I think, could have benefited from maybe another 15, 20 minutes, maybe another half an hour of storytelling space to actually tell the story. Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition, just does this far better. Forget about the cinematic version, watch the actual version that Zack Snyder created. And he takes his time and brings all the pieces together. Well, this one's the exact opposite of that. It just feels too rushed. And there are things where there should be, I think, some better backstory, better character development, more plausible explanations for things that are lacking as a result of this film just being rushed. And it just feels a little bit like, there's some enjoyable stuff in there, but there was a bit of meat that was missing, because the story was sort of this crazy idea of 2-hour time limit. It's just a bad call, and they need to drop it as soon as possible. They need to drop it. They need to go to their creative teams and say, create the best possible version of the story, the best possible version of the film that you can. That's what we want. Now, obviously, we don't want to see a 12-hour movie, but we want to see the best possible version. When I heard about the 2-hour time limit, it kind of reminded me of that scene from, the movie There's Something About Mary, where Ben Stiller picks up that hitchhiker and he is obsessed with this ab program that he's created, which is a couple of minutes shorter than the standard 7-minute ab workout. And he gets so upset. My program's better because it's shorter, and it's like, it doesn't make any difference, right? So the 2-hour time limit doesn't make any difference at all to the quality of a movie or to whether or not I, as a member of the public, will commit to going to watch it. So just get rid of it. It's stupid, and I think it really hampered this film. There's an argument that takes place at one point. I won't spoil it for you, but there's an argument amongst the team about Superman and how he should be brought back into the film. And I have to say, it did feel, again, this is one example where the story feels forced. To me, it doesn't feel like the best way of actually bringing Superman into the plot at all. And what you've got is Batman in particular. To me, it really stood out. He's arguing a position that just seems, well, quite contradictory, but I feel sorry for them because it seems to me like they had very little time to play with, so they're thinking, how do we get Superman into this plot as quickly as possible? And this is sort of the best they could do with the time limits that they had. But Batman argues a position that just sort of seems contrary to how his character is universally known. He's known as the superhero where the end does not justify the means. You know, he doesn't, even if he can get a good outcome, he doesn't do anything to achieve that outcome. And yet here he is arguing the exact opposite. Now, I know they have made him more jaded and cynical in Batman v Superman, but even then, in Batman v Superman, his relationship with Superman and the way that that relationship is crafted in Batman Superman, the whole distrust, the whole threat that he views Superman to be to the planet, and on top of that, they have just fought Doomsday, and so he understands some of the risks that they are debating about here, and yet he still argues for a position that really seems contrary to all of that as well. So, like I said, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I felt that's a classic example of what happens when you rush storytelling. You don't have time to create good plot points to progress the story. Instead, you're just forced into second-rate ways of trying to achieve outcomes. Steppenwolf. Steppenwolf never really feels like a serious threat. And this is, it sort of broke the mold a bit here because traditionally DC are known for having the better villains. But in this film, Steppenwolf, he feels kind of like a Marvel villain. He feels a bit like a villainous placeholder. He's there because they need someone to be a villain and they need him to do certain things and react against our heroes and all the rest of it. But you never really feel the threat is serious with him. And the funny thing is they do start to set it up. I really like the sequence at the beginning with Batman. And again, I won't spoil it for you, but they sort of set up this looming threat with Steppenwolf. But then it doesn't really quite pay off. And they isolate the whole plot with Steppenwolf in one particular village. It's pretty much a ghost town in Eastern Europe. And then the way they do that, clearly, again, this is time constraints, I guess. They don't show a lot of other people in the village. They focus on one family. It just doesn't really feel like there's a serious global threat to our planet. They're telling us that's the threat he poses. And we've seen some visuals at the beginning that suggest there was a big battle to defeat him. And so he's a serious threat to us. Which, by the way, is very Lord of the Rings-esque. But you never feel that. The way his character is presented on screen, you never feel that. The other problems I had with this film were what I would call technical issues. So first of all, and I don't think it was just the cinema that I was in, there were technical issues that I experienced with the audio, particularly the vocals. And I don't know what happened, but I don't know, maybe we just got an inferior print of the film in the cinema that I went to see it in this morning. But it just feels... well, it doesn't feel like it. The experience is that at moments the dialogue is not as clear as it should be. And it's bizarre because you'll have a conversation where, at one point the dialogue is clear and loud enough and well enunciated by the characters. And then at other points it's almost like maybe they're just mumbling the tail end of their script lines or it's a bit more muddy and not as clear, the audio. And so there was, now it clears up by the end of the film, but particularly at the beginning, there was just this real disparity in places. And there were several times where I had to sort of catch myself and say, what did he just say? What did she just say? And yeah, it was frustrating. Look, I don't know what it is, but it did seem that it was more than just the cinema that I was in. Maybe it's a version of the film that they got, I don't know. But it did feel like there were some audio issues with the film in general, particularly when it came to earlier on in the film and delivering some of the lines. The CGI in this film, as some critics have said, isn't the best. And I was hoping they were wrong, but they are right. It's not the best. Effectively, I'd say it's passable. The whole thing with Henry Cavill and the moustache, if you didn't know about it, you wouldn't notice it. but most people know about it. And so there were some scenes where it is kind of obvious. If you didn't know about it, you would sort of look at this and think, what's going on with his face? Not quite understanding why it doesn't quite look 100% right, but that was probably the least of the issues. It just, the CGI was passable, and in an action film and a superhero film, like, this is where Zack Snyder is so strong, and you could sense that his presence, his lost presence on the creation of this film. I think this is where the film became weak, as in the visuals. Batman v Superman, the visuals are phenomenal and they work well, and Zack Snyder knows how to do this and how to get the most out of creating comic book visuals on screen. And that's really, I think, missing from this. The CGI is sort of just, I would say it's passable, and in places it's implausible. There's one particular scene towards the beginning. By the way, I've heard some critics refer to this opening sequence with the Amazonians fighting Steppenwolf as the most amazing action set piece that they've seen in a film in years. No, I don't think that's true at all. It really isn't. I was sort of just waiting for this, and it wasn't at all. And there's one particular CGI sequence that happens where a much bigger or heavier object is tied to an arrow, and they fire the arrow on the end of a longish rope, and they're trying to progress this object forward, and it's all part of the big battle, so it's quite an important part of the sequence. And what happens is this arrow, which is obviously much lighter than the heavier object, is able, and it's fired from a very, very low position, probably about that far off the ground, with someone lying on their side, and the arrow is fired, and this object is thrown a very, very long distance forward, and basically a totally impossibly long distance forward. Now, I looked at that and I found that so, it was insulting. It's like, come on, guys. Like, did no one stop and actually say, hey, you know this arrow sequence we've got? The physics of it don't really make any sense at all. Maybe we should actually take 30 seconds somewhere else previously to establish that these arrows are magic arrows and they can lift far greater weights, you know, than what a normal arrow could do, and how the physics of that sort of work. And then they said, no, don't worry about it. It's just magic, mate. It's just superheroes. It'll all be good. The audience will be fine with it. Well, I think that most audience members, apart from perhaps very, 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 very young children, it was noticeable, and it was sort of like, that doesn't make any sense. And there were ways they could have done this. Like, all they needed to do was have someone shoot an arrow that was tied to that object to a much bigger falling object, right? And as it falls off the edge of a precipice or something, what does it do? It flings the heavier object that's now tied to it up in the air, and it throws it forward a great distance, right? That's how you do it. And it just seems to me that wouldn't have been a complicated thing to do at all. But instead, we get this. And some of the battle CGI and stuff is just, it just doesn't feel as good. It was a little bit frustrating because, as I said, Zack Snyder has a much better visual sensibility, I find, in general, and I think it was just lacking here. Steppenwolf, speaking of CGI, why is Steppenwolf CGI? To me, that was just a bad decision. I don't know why they did that. It makes absolutely no sense. In many ways, Steppenwolf is actually very similar to the Marvel villain Ronan the Accuser as he appears in Guardians of the Galaxy. Ronan the Accuser has a big handheld hammer-type weapon, just like Steppenwolf. He's a very similar sort of character. He's a world destroyer. He's hell-bent on interplanetary domination. There's a lot of similarities. But what you'd have to say that they did with Ronan the Accuser a lot better was that Ronan the Accuser, they actually put a man in costume, and they did makeup. And what you got was a strong actor with a strong stage presence, and they gave him makeup, and they just created a villain that's not the greatest Marvel villain, but is really good in that role and is excellent at filling the role that needs to be filled in Guardians of the Galaxy. Unfortunately, in this film, Steppenwolf is not like that, and one of the big reasons why is he's a voice-acted piece of CGI. I don't know why they did that. I really don't know why they did that. It would have been much better to have an actor with a strong, commanding presence who was put into costume and makeup and do it that way. Even if you have to change the look a little bit to make it work. What it actually ends up feeling like is there is a Saturday morning kids cartoon character that has been put into a live action film. And it's so tonally inconsistent. And every time you see him, to me, it just was so glaring. It just brings you out of the film. And it's frustrating because he is sort of quite pivotal to the story. And I think this is a big reason why his threat and menace never really feels real either. It just doesn't feel right. It was a bad decision. They shouldn't have done it. Lastly, you might remember in the video I made a couple of days ago about what I was hoping to get out of the experience of going along to see Justice League, I mentioned one specific thing that I didn't want to see, and I didn't want to see lots of political propaganda. I didn't want to see SJW propaganda. I go to movies, unless they're political or documentaries, I go to movies for a bit of escapism, right? That's what you go for. Well, within the opening minutes of this film, we have these totally pointless and totally out of place political messages that are nothing more than political commentary. They had no place in this film. You've got a scene about race relations in America with a Muslim immigrant shop owner and clearly what are supposed to be some white racists. You've got a sequence with a homeless man who's holding a sign on the street that says, "I tried," clearly a commentary on income inequality and poverty. But it doesn't make any sense. Now, there are films where you could do this and it would make sense, but it doesn't make any sense to have this. This is the kind of thing that might work in The Watchmen. But in this film, because you think about Batman v Superman, in Batman v Superman, the world is still a very broken place. And so they start the film by setting up this whole sequence, which is actually pretty good until you get to those two scenes of how the world is mourning and something is missing and the world is broken and dysfunctional because of the death of Superman. Right? And the fact that he's missing, there's a void there and all these problems have arisen. Now, the problem is when you get to these two scenes, it's like, hold on a minute. What you're implying here is that before Superman died, all of the race relations problems in America were fixed, that all of the income inequality issues in America were fixed, and that America was the sort of great bastion of peace, love, and the American dream. And then all of a sudden, Superman's dead and all of these evils like white nationalism and racism directed towards immigrant Muslim shop owners and income inequality are now a problem. Well, that's not true. Go and watch Batman v Superman. And clearly, it's a very broken world they've created there, and Superman hasn't saved the world. So why would you insert this into this new movie? And it's a hackneyed way of trying to put some social commentary into a film, and it just wasn't good. Like, I was watching it and I was just like, what are you doing? Thankfully, that sort of disappears, but it was stupid, basically. It didn't need to be there. It served no purpose, and it's hackneyed. It's done in such a blimmin' unsubtle and intrusive way that it was just dumb. In a nutshell, what do I think about this film? I think that Batman v Superman is the Ultimate Edition. I'm talking about Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition, the actual version that Zack Snyder created, is a far better film than what Justice League is. However, I think the big problem here is they were rushed, and rushing the film created problems, and I think it really shows. The other thing, of course, is the CGI, the technical aspect. I think that maybe on second or third viewings, you might see a little bit more and get a little bit more out of it, and so maybe the enjoyment factor might rise. It could be. I get a sense that maybe it could be one of those type of films. However, I think in the long run, I don't think this is going to hold up as long. It's not going to age well. Batman v Superman, I think, is aging well. I don't think this one will age well. And I don't think it's as good as Batman v Superman, which is a real shame. It just feels like that comic book sensibility, that DC comic book sensibility that Zack Snyder really captured in BVS, and the way he told a story is lost and is lacking in this film. And even the end credit scenes were like, yeah, okay, maybe. But if we get another film like this, then I don't know if it's it's not going to be that enjoyable. So I think what I'd say is, look, there's things that you'll enjoy about the film if you go and see it. If you're like me, there will be things about the film that you find a little bit frustrating, but it's not a terrible film. It's not a film you walk out of and you go, oh, that was awful, I want my money back. It's not like that at all. I've read one harsh review already, which I don't think is fair at all. There's still an enjoyment factor in this movie that you get out of it, and going to see it is still an enjoyable experience, even if it's not as good as it could be, and there are some glaring issues there. Other than that, I think that's all I want to say. If you've seen it, let me know what you think in the comments section below. And again, thank you. 1,000 subscribers, another little milestone there. And don't forget, if you like the content I'm producing and you want to support it and see more of it, please click on the Patreon link and become a supporter. The more financial assistance I can get on this journey, then the more of this content that I can put out there. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Left Foot Media.